What's up, everyone, and welcome into another episode of That Dynasty Show. We are back with our starts and sits of the week for week 3 of the NFL season. So far, we're batting pretty decently. A couple misses, a lot of hits, but the couple misses, especially for myself, I've really missed on a couple. Told you guys to sit Tua last week. That didn't work out. Told you to start Matt Stafford in week 1. That didn't work out. But we are hitting more than we're missing. It's the nature of the beast. We're never going to get everything right. But speaking of someone who tries to get them right but doesn't get as much right as I do, Tyler, how we doing, buddy?
Well, I had a rough week last week, clearly, but it's okay. We're here to bounce back, and tomorrow's a better day.
Man, the process is always right? You gotta. That's the thing with these starts and sits. You kind of look and see how the transaction trends, how the performance trends are looking, what the matchups are looking like, what the scenarios are around some of these players. And that's kind of where we pull a lot of these starts and sits from, right? And, we're not going to go out there and say, oh, make sure you're starting DeAndre Swift. Oh, make sure you're starting Cooper Kupp. Like, who does that help, right? These calls are meant to be, your wide receiver 3s, your RB2s, your flex spots. That's what we're going for. But without further ado, let's jump into our quarterback starts of the week. And Tyler, I'll let you give yours first here.
Yeah, so my quarterback start for the week, and I'm going to start him for the rest of the year in a lot of spots, is going to be Jimmy G. He's got the role for probably the remainder of the season. Maybe until the tail end, fantasy playoffs, Trey Lance, who knows, right? Who knows with that injury? That was gruesome and nasty. I wouldn't expect him to play at any point this year. And Jimmy G came in and put up 18 points in a partial game. So, I'm about him for this year and the rest of the year.
Yeah, and they're against Denver too, I believe, this week. And Russell Wilson and their coaching staff, they're looking to actually make a splash and kind of turn it around from what they have been performing like the last 2 weeks. So you can expect to see a good fight out of Denver in this one, which in terms we should be seeing a good fight from San Fran, especially a rejuvenated Jimmy G, right? Not expecting any starting or really any playing time this year. Now he's got it. Unfortunate how it happened, but I do like the matchup against Denver. Could be an exciting one to watch this weekend. My start of the week for the quarterback position is going to be one of your starts from last week, actually, Kirk Cousins, going against Detroit. This is just going to be a shootout game, right? Kirk Cousins was absolutely abysmal against the Eagles in week 2, but he had a really strong outing in week 1, and I'm kind of betting on him to bounce back. There's like memes going around on Twitter about how bad Kirk Cousins is in primetime versus how good he is in like the 1:00 Sunday games. It's a 1:00 Sunday game, so we can roll with it. Justin Jefferson's going to be firing on all cylinders. Adam Thielen actually kind of looked to step back into some relevance in the fourth quarter against the Eagles. And then Irv Smith randomly got, 8 targets from Kirk Cousins. So looking for a big rebound game from Kirk in this one. The sits for the quarterback, though, I'll do mine really quick here before I pass it back to you. It's going to be Tom Brady against Green Bay. And I did not expect to call Tom Brady a sit at any point in this season. But, man, he's got back-to-back weeks of only 11 to 12, I think like 11 and a half points in each week. And this week there's likely no Chris Godwin. There is no Mike Evans. There's likely no Julio Jones. Russell Gage is hobbled. Scotty Miller's hobbled. Their tight end situation sucks. It's Tom Brady and Leonard Fournette versus the Green Bay Packers. And I don't want to bet on this one at all. And I don't think if you have Tom Brady, chances are you have him as your QB1, if not one of your very high-end QB2s, right? I'm really treading lightly on this one. I don't see him if we're taking away Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Julio Jones, we're taking away his entire arsenal, and he hasn't put up more than 12 points with those guys these first 2 weeks. I'm really nervous about starting Brady in this one, so I'm leaving him on the bench in week 2.
Week 3, but yeah, I'm with you.
Week 3.
I wish I left him on the bench in week 2, right? So mine's gonna be Matt Ryan. I'm gonna sit him this week, and just mostly because I think this game's actually gonna go Indianapolis's way. I think it's actually a really bad matchup for Kansas City, and there's a chance they get really beat up in the interior, and Jonathan Taylor just runs loose. And I don't think they're gonna want to be throwing the football when he's running like that. Chiefs haven't looked all that explosive. I just think that it might be a hot take a little bit right now, but yeah, I think Indianapolis is going to have their way with this one, and it's going to be the Jonathan Taylor show.
Now, when you say the Chiefs haven't looked that explosive, you mean purely on defense, though, right? We got to clear that.
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously, yeah. I mean, I think that Indianapolis is really going to control the clock here a lot.
Yeah, and you know what? We're kind of waiting for the Jonathan Taylor game to happen, right? Like, he's been held mostly in check the first 2 weeks, so you know what's going to happen, and you know he's going to want to step up in a big way against one of the league's best teams. So don't hate that call there. Speaking of Jonathan Taylor, though, we'll move over to our running back starts of the week, and my first one is going to be David Montgomery versus the Houston Texans. So Houston, they're letting up an absolute shit ton of points to the running backs through the first 2 weeks of the season. Seventh most fantasy points for opposing running backs. And honestly, I toted Montgomery as a sit last week against Green Bay, and he went out there and had himself a 15.5 point PPR game. I can see that probably being a lot closer to his floor in this one. I think he will see 15 to 20, maybe even more points in this one, because this is a game that Chicago shouldn't have too many issues with. I mean, obviously Chicago's not amazing. Houston's not amazing, but this is Chicago's easiest matchup so far. They looked good in the rain game against San Francisco, or should I say as good as they could, right? They did what they had to do to get the win. And I think they're going to go into Houston and they're going to do what they have to do to get the win. And how they're going to do that is funneling the ball to probably their best offensive player in David Montgomery. So expect him to see 18 plus carries and an additional 4 to 6 targets in this one. I think he's a really good boom play in week 3.
Yeah, and so you want me to go into my next one, or do you want to do 2 of them?
No, sure, go ahead.
All right, cool. So my first one is going to be Kareem Hunt versus Pittsburgh. I mean, we saw what he's capable of in week 1. I think he's a candidate to have 6+ targets and always a threat to score a touchdown. I can see this one being a tough, grinded out game for sure. But I can definitely also see a world where Kareem Hunt is heavily leaned on. And Nick Chubb is also heavily leaned on. It's going to be a coin flip, I think, most weeks between who booms and who busts between Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And I'm going to take my chances on Kareem Hunt here. I mean, throwing him in your lineup with a possibility of 24 points and a floor of pretty much, 8 to 10. I'm going to keep him in the starting lineup here this week for sure.
And plus, it never hurts to have a guy playing in those Thursday night football games. I mean, if I don't have a guy playing in fantasy football on a Thursday night game and it's not the Panthers playing, I make some stupid parlays, right? It's always just good to have some sort of dog in the fight. So yeah, I do like the call. I think Kareem Hunt's actually a pretty damn good play against Pittsburgh, especially. I mean, their defense is obviously missing their biggest guy in TJ Watt. So I think teams are going to kind of funnel the run game through Pittsburgh, and Kareem Hunt's going to see plenty of his. My second running back star is Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs versus the Titans. We're still waiting for Josh Jacobs to go out there and have himself, a day, kind of like the day that we know he can have. We've seen it before. He had 19 carries for 69 yards this past weekend against the Cardinals. Not amazing, but it's encouraging, right? He had 19 attempts in a close game. This should be, I don't want to say it's going to be a close game because the Titans have not looked good at all to start the season, but I see this as a get right game for Vegas because both of these teams are 0-2. Vegas is much better than an 0-2 team, right? They should not be 0-2. I think they're going to get a lot of positive momentum for their guys, especially Josh Jacobs, who has not really found anything to be positive about. And the Titans are currently letting up the third most fantasy points to fantasy running backs. So kind of the stars are aligning in this one. If Jacobs doesn't boom in this one with at least 15 plus points, then, I'm going to have to start backtracking on some of the takes I was taking on him in the offseason. But I think this is a get right game for Josh Jacobs. And if I got him, I'm more than happy with playing him as my RB2 in week 3. Oh, you're muted, buddy.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to eat my words on Josh Jacobs, but yeah, like you said, hoping for a boom week out of him. But my second start is going to be Zeke versus New York. Chances are he's probably a weekly starter for you, but a lot of people are probably considering putting him on the bench, just like Josh Jacobs. I mean, Zeke hasn't scored more than 5 points yet this year, and he had 15 carries last week. But he plays well against really bad teams. He always does. And I think that part of it is Jerry Jones' embarrassment of paying the second most effective running back on that roster, because Tony Pollard is a stud. And I think that takeover is coming sooner rather than later. But I can easily see them just handing the ball to Zeke on the goal line. And I mean, that offense looked pretty efficient with Cooper Rush out there. I mean, the defense obviously carried Dallas through that win against Cincinnati, but I mean, when you look back at it, Cooper Rush played a pretty good game, and they did lean on the run game a lot. So I could see it going this way again against New York, who's a pretty bad team. So I could see Zeke finding the goal line easily once, or the end zone once, at least, maybe even twice in this one.
Yeah, and you'd really hope so, because week 1, 49 total yards. Week 2, 49 total yards. Hasn't found the end zone yet, has only been targeted 4 times, does have 25 carries between 2 games, but that's not really what we're used to seeing with Zeke. But I do like the call not to I mean, I think you should be hitting the panic button on Ezekiel Elliott for his dynasty value. But in terms of a starter against the Giants in week 3, I think he's more than capable of supporting at least RB2 numbers this week. So I like the call there to start him against the Giants. Plus, again, Monday Night Football game. Keep yourself away from those stupid, risky parlays by starting a guy. As you can tell, I've lost a lot of money in the last 2 weeks. But speaking of losing things, running backs that were sitting, this one breaks my heart, but it's going to be Chase Edmonds versus Buffalo. Buffalo's defense is a monster. They are a bottom 4 team for fantasy running backs right now. And Chase Edmonds, I mean, they're going to be riding the hot hand in Miami, and Chase Edmonds was not the hot hand in week 2 whatsoever. Raheem Mostert had more carries than him. Raheem Mostert showed more burst than him. Raheem Mostert just looked better than him. And I'm kind of worried that that can bleed into this one. Not only that, but there's no chance. There's no chance that Miami is going to rely on their run game to beat Buffalo. They're going to rely on Jalen Waddle. They're going to rely on Tyreek Hill. They're going to rely on Tua. They're going to want to make sure that they get things done, because it's a very big matchup between these two teams, right? And I just don't see Chase Edmonds being that difference maker in that game. So I know a lot of people drafted him as like an RB3 flex option or have acquired him this offseason when he went to Miami, but I can't see many scenarios where I'm starting Edmonds against Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to start anybody against Buffalo, right? It's scary. But so my number one sit for the running backs is going to be Rhamondre Stevenson from New England. I just don't like the workload that he's seen. It's just so split. I mean, he saw a quarter of the snaps week 1 and just over 50% or just over 60% in week 2. He just hasn't done anything. There's zero upside to be had with this guy. If you're lucky, you're going to get flex production out of him with possibly a touchdown, but I don't even really see that happening. There's nothing really to like about this New England backfield with either piece. I don't think Damian Harris, I mean, he's touchdown dependent too, so you could call this a double. I'm sitting both Rhamondre and Damian Harris until one of them either gets hurt or something else changes.
Yeah, and kind of until one of them does get hurt, they're both just touchdown dependent weekly options, and I'm not going to count on that against Baltimore. Baltimore's been one of the hottest offenses through 2 weeks in the NFL, and the Patriots, quite frankly, have not. This is not a game where the Pats are going to go out of their way to really dominate the ground game. They're just going to need to play catch up. So I like the call to sit Rhamondre here. My second running back sit of the week is actually going to be the running back on the opposite side of the field of Chase Edmonds, and it's going to be Devin Singletary. Miami is letting up the very fewest amount of points to fantasy running backs right now. Granted, they haven't played anyone particularly amazing, but nonetheless, Miami has had a stout run defense. And then Devin Singletary, just as an individual, he has 12.5 PPR points through 2 weeks. That's it. He was a non-factor in week 2. He was really a non-factor in week 1. This is a true running back by committee between Zach Moss and James Cook. Obviously, James Cook hasn't really seen many carries except for garbage time, but they're going to keep giving him more and more work as the season goes, which obviously doesn't bode well for Zach Moss or Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is definitely the quote unquote back to own in Buffalo right now in terms of 2022 production. But yeah, he's not going to have a big game against Miami. I wouldn't even know if I could call him touchdown dependent, because I don't even know if a touchdown would save his day. Like, I don't know if he'll say double-digit fantasy points in this one, even with a touchdown. So Singletary, he's an absolute must-win for me against Miami.
Yeah, and I'm with you on pretty much everything so far. My number 2 is going to be Darrell Henderson versus Arizona. This mostly has to do with the fact that I think Cam Akers looked pretty good last week, at least, in comparison to his week 1. But I think he's just going to take a good amount of important touches away. And I think the ball is going to be too spread out through the air in this offense. Just watching the game last week, Matt Stafford was starting to find a groove with Allen Robinson, and Tyler Higbee looks so good. I mean, this is just going to be an aired out offense. And Darrell Henderson is really going to have to rely on 8 catches and 60 yards through the air if he wants to be productive and see the lineup.
Yeah, and the issue is that Darrell Henderson didn't have a single target in week 2. Meanwhile, Cam Akers had, I think, 3 or 4, and Cam Akers also had 5 or 6 more carries on the ground than Darrell Henderson. So yeah, this is a split backfield, as split as they come. And Cam Akers is going to be the guy to own here, not Darrell Henderson, which, we always knew was a possibility, or we knew would be what was going to happen. But yeah, Henderson is just another one of those touchdown dependent kind of guys. We'll move on over to those fantasy wide receivers. And my first one, both of these guys are, it's kind of surprising that I need to list them as starts, because I didn't think I would have to, especially this early in the season. But it's definitely relevant to list these guys as starts. My first one's going to be Adam Thielen. Like I mentioned, Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen are going against Detroit. Obviously, I was starting Kirk Cousins. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to start Justin Jefferson, because, again, who's that going to help? But Adam Thielen, on the other hand, he hasn't done much through the first 2 weeks, and I think this game has shootout written all over it. Adam Thielen is an absolute touchdown machine, and he has not scored through his first 2 weeks. He had double-digit touchdowns in multi-years in a row, and I'm not going to say that he's going to go out in 2022 and catch up to that and score multi-digit touchdowns, but he is much better than having 0 touchdowns through 2 weeks. And I think he will find the end zone in this one at least once, and he'll still add, 50 to 70 yards as well. So I think Adam Thielen's going to be a pretty solid flex or wide receiver 3 option against Detroit this week.
Yeah, and he was a pretty solid buy low candidate during the offseason too. So my first receiver to start this week is going to be DeVonta Smith versus Washington. He had a really good week last week, 7 targets, 7 catches. And I think that Washington's going to have to commit to slowing down A.J. Brown in a division matchup. And DeVonta Smith last week, he scored more points than both Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. So let's see his stock rise, and I'm definitely starting him again this week.
My second wide receiver start this week is going to be DK Metcalf against the Atlanta Falcons. Didn't really think I would have to tell people to start DK Metcalf, but he's only scored 18 points through the first 2 weeks. He has had 13 targets total, which isn't too bad, but obviously we've seen DK have 13 target weeks before. Don't absolutely love him getting that just through the first 2 weeks of the season. However, against the Falcons, this is a good matchup for Seattle. I think both DK and Tyler Lockett are going to have pretty big weeks. Atlanta is letting up just an absolute shit ton of points to fantasy wide receivers. DK Metcalf has not found the end zone yet. DK Metcalf has not had more than 36 yards in a single game. And I think it's a safe bet to say that against Atlanta, he'll top both of these. Similar to Adam Thielen, I said Thielen would have 50 to 70 yards and a touchdown. It's probably the stat line I would expect DK to have, and he's got potential for a whole lot more against this defense. So don't panic too much on DK Metcalf. Stay the course. Keep him in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot, and roll him out against the Falcons, because this is a juicy matchup for Seattle.
And certainly another good buy low guy too, right? So my second start for the week is going to be Garrett Wilson against Cincinnati. And I think that really, regardless of how this game goes, this guy's going to be a weekly starter on your roster. I mean, he had 14 targets last week for 100 plus and 2 touchdowns. He had 8 targets in week 1. This is just a rookie who's come in, and I think he's going to continue to dominate. I think he's going to continue to show that he's the best receiver on the field, and it's not going to matter who's throwing him the ball. And until it's Zach Wilson season again, I'm riding with Joe Flacco, and I'm gonna take Garrett Wilson. I'm gonna put him in my starting lineup weekly.
Dude, 14 targets. I mean, like 8 targets in his debut game. Pretty impressive. But 14 targets as your second game in the NFL ever is just insane. Like Garrett Wilson in redraft leagues was an absolute smash on the waiver wire this week. I got him in so many leagues where I just unloaded my fab dollars. It's whatever. It's fine, because I completely agree. I think Garrett Wilson is just going to keep building off this, and I'm nervous to see what goes on when Zach Wilson comes back. But for week 3, we don't have to worry about that. Joe Flacco's still there. He is Joe Flacco's favorite target. 22 targets through the first 2 weeks. Yeah, this is going to be a smash play. Plus, I think the Bengals are going to find themselves on offense this week, right? Like, there's no reason that the Bengals should be playing as bad as they have. And I think that they're really going to give it to the Jets because they need a team to take it out on. And they're going to be playing catch-up mode, or the Jets are going to be playing catch-up mode. And Garrett Wilson I'm not going to say 14 targets, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him see another 14 targets in this one. But yeah, so that's a good segue into my first sit of the week at the wide receiver position. And it's going to be Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson's teammate. And here's the thing, man. Elijah Moore, he's behind Garrett Wilson, obviously, right now in the pecking order. He's also behind Corey Davis. Corey Davis has actually had a pretty strong start to the season. And Joe Flacco has been good, but he is not good enough to support 3 solid fantasy wide receivers. And I don't think Elijah Moore is going to take anything away from Garrett Wilson and Corey Davis, at least not while Joe Flacco is under center. So just not his biggest fan against the Bengals in this one. I mean, I said it so many times in the offseason, right? People don't realize that Corey Davis wasn't healthy when Elijah Moore was really balling out last year. People don't realize that Elijah Moore was basically the only target. Like, this offseason, they got Corey Davis back, obviously, but they added Breece Hall. They added 2 really good tight ends, and they drafted Garrett Wilson. Like, Elijah Moore was probably, like, he's good, but he was probably a product of just having no one else around him. And now that the field is filled with other stars out there, he kind of gets lost. So Elijah Moore hasn't done anything for me in the first 2 weeks, and I'm finally going to sit him on my bench against the Bengals in week 3.
Yeah, and I'm going to sit another Mr. Moore, DJ Moore against New Orleans. DJ Moore has seen half as many targets pretty much in the first 2 weeks this year as he was seeing weekly last year. When you look back at it, he was getting, 10 plus targets a game, 12, 13 and some. And, now he's getting 6 targets a game, 6 targets, 3 catches, 43 yards in both games. Just last week against the Giants, he scored a touchdown and put up 13.5 points. Not my cup of tea. I'm not going to rely on him to score a touchdown every week, especially not this week against New Orleans, against Marshawn Lattimore, who gives the entire league problems. I don't really see a world where DJ Moore contributes to me winning a fantasy matchup this week. And even really further out into the year, if he's not going to see the targets that he was seeing last year, and we know how he is with touchdowns, we know he has trouble finding the end zone. So I'm gonna tread lightly on DJ Moore this week and probably a lot going forward. And I've been saying that for a lot of the guys, but yeah, I mean, this has been a very eye-opening 2 weeks in fantasy.
Yeah, and I hate that I agree with you, but unless his name is Christian McCaffrey, I'm not starting anyone from the Carolina Panthers. I mean, this offense looks flat. Matt Rule is the worst coach of all time. One of the worst coaches of all time, I should say. And you're right. DJ Moore, you got to rely on him to score a touchdown if he's going to really give you a good week in week 3. And as we've talked about so many times this offseason, DJ Moore is not the touchdown guy. We'd love him to be, but that's not him. And I wouldn't really bank on him to score in back-to-back weeks here. So fortunately, I got to agree with you on that one. This one, I don't know if you're going to agree with me on, because I know you really love this guy for some reason. Devin Duvernay of the Baltimore Ravens, your eternal buy low candidate this offseason, your eternal 20th round draft pick or whatever he was in like every single mock we did. He's actually had a really good start to the season, but he
smashed that fucking ADP, by the way.
Well, he's had 6 targets total through 2 weeks, and that's despite Lamar Jackson hanging like 5 touchdowns against Miami last week, right? Like Devin Duvernay has had 6 total targets. If he did not have a kick return touchdown in week 2, he would have been Mr. Irrelevant again. Having that kind of production off of kick returns and 6 total targets, which averages out to 3 targets a week, it's totally unsustainable, right? You want to talk about touchdown dependency. That's Devin Duvernay. Rashad Bateman owns the wide receiver reps. Mark Andrews obviously owns like the entire middle of the field for Baltimore. J.K. Dobbins could be back this week. That's one more mouth to feed on offense. And Lamar Jackson is just, he's playing out of his mind right now. You would think that'd be good for Devin Duvernay, but he's going to, the way that he's going to stay on top is by giving it to his best guys. He's going to go out of his way to give it to Mark Andrews. He's going to go out of his way to give it to Rashad Bateman. Devin Duvernay is not going to see more than 3 or 4 targets in this one, and there's probably not many weeks where he is. I know that he's been a popular waiver wire ad and a popular sleeper for many like you, but there's a 0.0% chance I would even think about putting him even into my most desperate roster in week 3.
I mean, the dude had he has how many 2 touchdowns right now? I mean, 2 touchdowns by week 2. I mean, if I told you that in the middle of the season, you'd be like, Tyler, you're an idiot. Get off the channel. I'm finding somebody else to talk to. But I'll move on from that. My second sit for wide receivers is going to be Courtland Sutton, actually. He's seen a really high target share, but for me, San Francisco is a really good defense. And I could see a world where this is a really grinded out game between these 2 offenses. And I think Denver's really disappointed for the most part since the arrival of Russell Wilson. And I don't see Courtland Sutton finding the end zone in this one. I don't think it's going to be him. And I don't see him having a big day. If he gets 7 catches and, 40 yards, I guess he puts up 11 points, but a lot of people have him as, their high-end wide receiver too. I don't think he's going to be that this week. I think he's more of a flex play, if that, on a weaker roster, but a sit on a number of contending solid rosters in your league.
See, I think that's a really bold take. I'm not going to say I completely disagree with it, but I can't say that I do agree with it, especially with Jerry Jeudy having his health issues, and we don't know if he's going to be out there. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, right? Like Denver has played pretty flat through the first 2 weeks. San Francisco has actually been playing some pretty good defense. So if they're smart, they'll just blanket Courtland Sutton because, I mean, Javonte Williams can't win the entire game for Denver, especially against San Francisco. And they do have a half decent run defense as well. So I would say, in my opinion, he's less of a sit and more of a proceed with caution kind of guy this week. But I like that you called that out because, again, this offense as a whole is just kind of weird. And I don't think Courtland Sutton's going to do what everyone wants him to do in week 3.
Yeah, I think you said it best, right? He's not going to do what everyone wants him to do. Like I said, in a lot of teams, you're not going to have a choice but to start him. But if you're one of those top 3 teams in the league that's, got a loaded flex spot, I wouldn't mind giving him the bench and letting somebody else who's been putting up, 13, 14 points a week, giving them the shot in the starting lineup this one if it makes me feel safer.
So moving into tight ends, right? We both got 1 start. We both got 1 sit. I love my start for tight end. Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals going against the New York Jets. So Hayden Hurst is one of those guys for me where he was probably number 2 or number 3 on my tight end sleepers list this offseason. And he's looking pretty damn good. He hasn't found the end zone yet, but he has finished with around 8 points in each of the first 2 weeks, which not the best thing in PPR leagues, but also at the tight end position, far from the worst thing, right? And that's without touchdowns. If his floor is 8 points or so without a touchdown, if he can sneak into the end zone, that's a 14 or 15 point week out of your tight end, out of your no-name streamer tight end in Hayden Hurst, right? So I really like that. I like him to finally get into the end zone against the Jets. And the big thing with him, he has 15 targets in the first 2 weeks. He is averaging 7.5 targets from Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, who needs a slump busting game, by the way. But he's averaging a really decent target share in a really good offense. So I'm looking to, I think Hayden Hurst finds the end zone in this one. I think he keeps up with his, 7 or 8 point pace without the touchdowns. So I think he's going to piece together a pretty damn decent week at the tight end position.
Yeah, and he's a guy we've seen be productive before, right? Too. So I like that one too. But my tight end for the week is going to be Dawson Knox versus Miami. He had a decent game last week, 5 targets, 4 catches, put up an 8-point fantasy week in PPR leagues. But I think that against Miami this week, it could be really high scoring. And even if it's not close, I think that Dawson Knox is probably going to see a fair share of targets in this one. I mean, we saw what Miami's offense is capable of last week. Don't think it's going to repeat against this Buffalo defense, but I think it's going to compete at least and put points on the board. So I think the Bills are going to be looking to throw the ball. So I think Dawson Knox is going to be a viable start this week if you don't have one of those top 5 guys.
Yeah, and Dawson Knox, I mean, he's a lock to see at least 1 or 2 looks in the red zone from Josh Allen, right? His week 1 was pretty disappointing against the Rams, but last week or in week 2 against the Titans, he had 5 targets, 4 catches for 41 yards. I mean, no one's going to complain about their back end tight end like Dawson Knox getting 8 points, right? Pretty similar to Hayden Hurst, except Dawson Knox has a much higher chance of finding the end zone than Hayden Hurst. So I do really like that call. I think Dawson Knox is a good flyer this week, probably in that tight end 6 to 9 range. No pun intended there. Hey-o. But the sits for the tight end, dude, I cannot talk today. But the sits for the tight end for me is going to be your buddy. I feel like you mentioned that you personally know or personally have seen Mike Gesicki play high school sports, if I remember correctly. And I'm sitting him against Buffalo. Again, it's Buffalo, dude. I really don't, unless it's a stud. Like, obviously, I'm not going to go out and sit Waddle. I'm not going to sit Tyreek Hill. But these question mark guys, like Mike Gesicki, like Chase Edmonds, guys like that, I'm not touching them if they're against Buffalo. That's how good Buffalo's defense is. That's how good Buffalo as a team is in general. They're letting up, bottom 7, bottom 8 points to tight ends for the first 2 weeks. Mike Gesicki is totally touchdown dependent. I mean, even last week he had 4 catches for 41 yards and a touchdown. It's just, and that's not going to happen every week. The only reason why that happened is because that game turned into an absolute shootout and defenses forgot how to play defense in the second half of that game. That's not going to happen to Buffalo. Buffalo's not going to forget how to play defense. So yeah, Mike Gesicki, I know this time a couple of years ago, he was like firmly in the conversation to be like the next top 5 tight end. Give up on that dream. It's not going to happen. At very best case scenario, he's a low tight end 1 in Dynasty, and he's an absolute must sit against Buffalo in week 3.
Yeah, and he was a rival, by the way. He's not a homie. So, yeah, couldn't care less about that guy. But my sit for this week is actually going to be my guy, Dalton Schultz, against New York even. Cooper Rush really barely looked his way last week and compared to what Dak does. 9 targets in week 1 compared to 4 in week 2. Yeah, just really not a fan here. Even in the matchup, I'm just staying away. He's also questionable. He's dealing with a PCL sprain in his knee. So I'm just staying away from Dalton Schultz this week and going to start an old reliable, I don't know, Gerald Everett or Tyler Higbee or whoever is my number 2 tight end on that team. I'm going to feel comfortable getting a solid 8 points out of that rather than what could be a complete 0 out of Dalton Schultz.
Yeah, I agree. It sucks, but Dalton Schultz, if he does play this week, he's just going to be a decoy out there. He's not going to have himself a very productive week. Like, I know we're mostly focused on Dynasty here, but one of my redraft leagues, for example, I took Dalton Schultz, and even though they haven't officially ruled him out yet for this weekend, if they do start him, like I said, he's going to be a decoy. But I went out, I picked up Irv Smith, right? Guys like Irv Smith, Hayden Hurst, could be out on your waiver wire, not on mine. I looked for him, but yeah, those types of guys, if they're hanging out there, or you got them on a deep bench, or you could acquire them for cheap, and you're really in a predicament. I think those would be pretty good fillers for guys like Mike Gesicki, for guys like Dalton Schultz, because they're not going to help you out much in week 3. But got to wrap this video up with our streams of the week for kicker and defense. And I kind of explain this every week, but basically what I do here is I just go on to Sleeper, go on Yahoo, ESPN, go on all the different fantasy apps and try to find kickers and defenses that are universally owned in like 50%, give or take, or less of leagues for streaming options, because I don't know about you, but I hate having to hold on to my kickers and defense in a lot of leagues. I'll just stream them. So this week I'm streaming Miami's kicker, Jason Sanders, against Buffalo. And Buffalo's got a really good defense. It's usually pretty good for kickers, right? If Buffalo's not going to allow many touchdowns, Miami's still going to want to get points on the board. Jason Sanders is going to be trotting onto the field a lot in this one. So think he's got some good upside against this really good Buffalo defense. And then the defense start of the week is actually going to be Tyler's boys, the Dallas Cowboys, against the New York Giants. They're playing on Monday Night Football, so again, gives you something to root for. But Daniel Jones has only thrown 1 interception through 2 games. We know Daniel Jones. We know that the interceptions are going to come. We know that the fumbles are going to come. And Dallas is in need of like a big defensive statement, especially Diggs, right? Because last year he made his bread and butter by having an absolute ton of interceptions, and he's going to see this as an opportunity to go out there and pick off Daniel Jones once, twice, maybe even 3 times. So I'm expecting a pretty good fantasy game from the Dallas defense against the Giants.
Yeah, especially with a guy like Micah who could literally have 3 strip sacks as well, and Micah Parsons. That could be you could be starting a quarterback at your defensive spot this week if you put Dallas in.
Yeah, so going to be a good one. They're going to be a pretty I was going to say they're going to be a pretty popular play in daily fantasy, but since they play on Monday night, I mean, I guess no one's going to be playing them because you can't. But that's going to do it for us here today on That Dynasty Show for our week 3 starts and sits. Thanks for rocking us with us. Thanks for rocking us with us. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Thanks for rocking with us today. Nonetheless, I'm not going to talk too much more because clearly I can't talk today. But if you like this video, hit that like button. If you have any start-sit questions of your own, feel free to leave a comment down below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video or any of our other videos have helped you out along the way throughout this off-season or these early stages of the season, hit that subscribe button. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. Tyler, you got anything to say before we get going?
No. Have a good night. Thanks for watching.
All right. For myself, for Tyler, and for That Dynasty Show, hopefully I'll remember how to talk next time, and we'll see you in the next video.